So, without anybody really noticing, somehow, Haas are 6th place in the constructors. What? How? In the name of all that's holy, did they do that? A team with no real sense of direction, a constant problem with tyre management and degradation, as well as a team owner that seems quite happy to be seen as a bit of a skinflint, not really listening to the team principal who's been clamouring for more money as all the other teams are investing or bringing out outside investors, and otherwise just seems quite happy to make do and mend. And also being the team that was most famously known for having a team boss who ran his mouth off and talking about rock stars and, onanism. Look, if you don't know what that means, look it up, okay? But in the space of just a few months, the team has suddenly changed. It's metamorphosed itself into being quite introspective, honest of its faults, and more willing to think outside the box and take some more risks. And yet not just doing the old faithful and going long and hoping for a safety car, because they did that a lot. All of this culminating at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix when Kevin Magnussen basically emulated the good old-fashioned Yano Trulli train and held up the majority of the backmarkers of the grid to ensure that Nico Hulkenberg would score a solitary point for them. And admittedly, it was a little bit cheeky, and it did cause a lot of controversy, but hey, for us audience members, we thought it was fantastic. Cars racing on a track. For position! Say what you will about that incident, be it unsportsmanlike, as Racing Bulls would like to put it, or whether it was a tour de force and thinking outside of the box. What Haas did pretty much sums up the mentality of the bottom 5 teams currently in F1 2024. If you look back to this time last year, 8 of the 10 teams had scored, with McLaren being a really big sticking out sore thumb scoring no points. This year we've now got 4 teams not scoring any points, and the only reason that Haas did score was because Lance Stroll hit the wall and then ultimately retired, which sums up what we are going to be seeing more of here. The top 5 teams pretty much taking up all of the points, and the bottom 5 teams lucky to score any. What makes this all the more harder is that reliability is remarkably good. Unless, of course, you're Alpine, and of course, unless you're Pierre Gasly, who seems to have inherited Fernando Alonso's car that seems to give up the ghost almost every other race. Sorry, I don't mean to kick Alpine while it's down, but I haven't seen such a tragic decline of a team since the likes of Haas in 2021 or even McLaren in 2015. With the team principal Ayao Kamatsu now taking up the mantle as the team principal, having been the head of engineering before, which seems to be a bit of a trend recently, with previously head of engineers taking up the main mantle, the king's chair, as noted most obviously by the likes of Mike Crack. Kamatsu basically set the expectations of the team to absolute zero, expecting the team to not set the world alight anytime soon. Based on some of his comments, you can infer that despite Gunther Steiner being very popular with the masses and being one of the best managers they probably ever worked for, Kamatsu was indirectly having a dig at the upgrade path and strategy that their former boss had implemented over the course of the last few years, and that the infamous Austin upgrade of last year was the reason that the 2024 car proper got held up in developmental purgatory, since most of the parts then got to be rushed onto the 2023 car, and thusly why Kamatsu reckons that they're really not going to be setting the world alight in the first part of the season. Kind of like what happened with McLaren in the first part of last year, where they really had to kind of catch up on the things they had lost on during the winter. Well, what does he mean by this exactly? What was Gunther Steiner talking about? Well, I have finally gotten around to reading or listening to the book that Gunther Steiner made, Surviving to Drive. The audio version, by the way, is read by Gunther himself, and I'm not gonna lie, it's a little bit of a slog. He's a little bit monotonous, ironically, but hey, could you really think of anyone else who could read it and make it sound authentic and genuine? So I appreciate him recording for an audiobook. I recorded an audiobook once, about 12 hours long, 180,000 words, and so many tricky pronunciations. Steiner talks about the Hungary 2022 upgrade, and how he believes that incremental upgrades, a piecemeal strategy that McLaren has vowed to enact this year with the MCL38, is not something that he is a fan of. Instead, what Steiner would rather want to do is get to know a car inside and out, get to optimize it fully, basically know it like a dear old friend, and only then could you even consider to know exactly what you need to upgrade. So when you do, it's a massive bump up, like a B-spec effectively, although we don't really get B-spec cars nowadays because the chassis is remaining the same because of the cost cap. But unfortunately, that methodology that did work for the first few years of Haas's existence doesn't really work anymore, because there is a constant developmental battle, because with the cost cap, you have to make sure that every upgrade that you do bring to the track works. So more often than not, the upgrade that they do bring, as long as the correlation between the wind tunnel and real life is good, then it's going to make a big difference on track. Upgrades becoming so ubiquitous these days in Parlour, we get YouTube channels dedicated to upgrade updates, as well as Formula One providing a show and tell sort of solution for the media to digest. F1 Unchained is a really good channel that does catalogue all of the upgrades per race, so give them a like and a subscribe. Kamatsu has acknowledged that this wasn't the way to go, and despite Steiner being a great manager of people and having the backing of his employees, the long-term future of the team was starting to look more and more stagnant in the wake of gaining, finally, a stable sponsor, and no real dramas in 2023. In fact, when you compare it to recent years, Haas's 2023 season was relatively tame. The only controversy that they courted was the whole incident with track limits at Austin when they put in their appeal at the very last minute. So last minute, in fact, that the FIA had to change the rules that you had to actually bring the appeal much sooner after the race ended. So, congratulations, Haas, you have a legacy. I understand that Ayao Kamatsu, when you compare him to Gunther Steiner, he's not exactly a charismatic person. He doesn't set the world alight. But to be honest, I don't think that's what Haas needs right now. You don't need a loudmouth personality. You just need somebody who knows what they're talking about and can get on with the job. They have been in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons over the past few seasons, so quite frankly, they need a couple of years quietly where they can get their head down, court no controversy, and just try and be in Formula One team where they don't cause any trouble. And I think with Kamatsu at the front, unless they do really well, in which case, thanks to the team principal's name, I can then go, Ayo! I think the best thing for them to do is just be a typical Formula One team with a respectable sponsor, and they don't end up getting embroiled in any sort of argy-bargy things. Yes, he's not going to be a source of quotes, sound bites, and publicity stunts like his predecessor, but when you realize that Steiner was basically doing multiple jobs at once, including finding sponsors himself, you can understand why he might have stretched himself a bit thin. What Kamatsu can do, being an engineer, is be able to delegate all of those small little jobs in terms of public relations, management of sponsors, as well as hospitality, and give them to relevant people who might have the time to be able to do that work, so that means Kamatsu can just be, well, the team principal. And based on all of the stuff that he's been talking about in terms of a plan based on the limited resources, it does seem like a pretty solid plan. Not quite as inspirational as the likes of James Vowles, but this being Haas, I'll take it. With an eye for engineering, Kamatsu's plan first and foremost was to tackle the team's lingering problem with tyre management, with spending the majority of the Bahrain test event doing longer race stints to fully understand how their tyres worked over a race distance. Honestly, that was the thing they really needed to do the most, because it's all very well and good having a Nico Hulkenberg who can bring that car into Q3 on the regular or somewhat regular, with Magnussen making an occasional appearance, but it doesn't make much difference if after about 10 laps or so, the tyres completely fall off and then you get the two cars right at the back, like they weren't even in the top 10. In fact, in a way, that's kind of worse than just being at the back right from the beginning. At least by then you've not really lost that many positions, and you were not even close to scoring points. So, the situation that Haas had last year, when many times they would get like a P8, P9, P10, and then before you know it, without you even realizing it, they'd be P16, and you go like, how on earth did Haas do that badly? They were almost as bad as Bottas was for most of last year. You know what I'm talking about. Many instances last year where you just looked at Valtteri's position and went, blimey, how did you get down there, Valtteri? Granted, it would be amazing if Gene Haas just loosened his purse strings just a little bit to allow Haas to update their equipment and thusly not have to rely quite so much on Dallara. Then they'll be able to think of things more on the fly instead of having to deal with a feedback loop, relying on an independent contractor for the chassis development. But it's clear that Gene isn't inclined to do that, not looking at the bigger picture about what all the other teams around them are doing. They're either gaining multiple major sponsors, by the way, Williams-Komatsu deal, not only is it a multi-year partnership and a reunion of a sponsorship they had back in the 90s, it's also one of their biggest monetary deals in their entire history. This is a big deal. Then of course you got the outside investment coming from likes of Dalton Capital, and of course Ryan Reynolds' Maximum Effort outfit. But at the same time, that does come with a bit of a caveat, because if you've got a celebrity as a main backer of your team, you do run the risk of your team's identity being lost in mainstream media, and then you end up sometimes with a team being referred to as insert celebrity name, here's F1 team. Because I have seen articles about Alpine where they refer to Ryan Reynolds' F1 team in dire straits. I can now understand a bit why Gene Haas was a bit reluctant to partner up with Ryan Reynolds. Yes, of course, the MoneyGram deal is a really major one, and it's something that Gunther Steiner was really proud of. But it's only one sponsor. The Haas sponsorship tree is looking very bare. But at least the appointment of Kamatsu is a solid one, and somebody who gets the engineering needs of the team and is aware of the situation of their present place on the grid, that they're going to have to do whatever it takes to score just 1 point amongst the gaggle of the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th best teams, because it's going to be a free-for-all if you're anyone from Racing Bulls downwards. And that's where the Jeta maneuver comes into play here. And even though Haas have retrospectively admitted that, yeah, maybe Kevin's move on Tsunoda was a little bit cheeky and that we should have given him the place because Racing Bulls went absolutely apoplectic, calling it unsportsmanlike because Kevin Magnussen was just gaining penalties with his situation with Albon, and Kevin was just like, screw it, I've got all these penalties, way! But in a Danish accent. Come on, from an audience perspective, it was great. Seeing all those cars jostling for position, Tsunoda trying to get past and then not getting past, and then just bracing yourself on the radio. Is he going to lose his mind? Is he going to have an absolute meltdown? Granted, all of this was just for 1 point further up the road. None of these guys were even in a chance for a point, and Nico was the one that got it. But the fact that Haas was willing to take this risk and take a chance, do something daring, kind of like what Carlos Sainz did at Singapore with Lando Norris to try and gain some sort of glory or extra points from other teams, is a pretty big deal. It's that kind of thinking that is going to get teams down on the second half of the grid for a point, or 2, or maybe 4. There are going to have to be moments of luck that the top 5 teams don't have, but the bottom 5 teams do. And even though Haas has admitted that they're really not going to set the world alight over the next few races, the fact they're able to think outside the box and have a plan as to what they need to do next to try and kick on and get over that time management issue, they will be able to go forward in leaps and bounds from there. There is some sort of plan at Haas, which makes me feel so relieved. And I feel like the next phase of this has got something to do with that superstar from Jeta, Oliver Bearman. Yes, I promise this is the last time I'll talk about Bearman, but please hear me out. Yes, I get it. Formula One is mostly based around British media, so of course Oliver Bearman will be in the headlines. But this time around, Haas has a good reason for championing the young British driver, because they have worked with the guy multiple times last year, and it's becoming more and more obvious with their Ferrari connection that the future plan of Haas will have something to do with the 18-year-old British driver. In the 2 free practice stints he undertook with Haas last year, he didn't put a foot wrong and greatly impressed the team with his work ethic and overall package. This year, he's not going to do just 2, he's going to do 6. That is way more than what is required by the teams to do in terms of giving young drivers a chance, because every single team has to offer at least 2 FP1 slots to prospective young future drivers and talents. Some of the teams take it with gusto, and they may do, kind of like with McLaren, but then you get teams like Red Bull who begrudgingly do it right at the last race, when they get 2 of their juniors to drive around very, very slowly to make sure that they don't damage the cars. So that means they can't have any fun, they can't go hell for leather. Besti for Mercedes in Mexico, for example, he wasn't allowed to do a push lap. He was focusing on long race stints, so he didn't even get a chance to drive the car high for leather and have some fun. Poor guy. Haas is more than happy to give their Ferrari Academy driver time in the car, since Kamatsu has very much asserted his gusto for considering the British driver for a seat next year. And yes, of course, Haas is not really well known for taking on rookies, because they made a big song and dance about that fact over the last couple of years, but I feel like this time around, Oliver Bearman is more than just a typical rookie. He'll be doing more in a Haas car, so you'll get to know how the team operate. He'll get to do more time in the 2022 Ferrari car, as well as much more time in the simulators for both Ferrari and Haas, considering he is the reserve driver for both teams. What Kamatsu is lining up for 2025 is to get on top with many of the team's car issues that have plagued them for the longest time, to further refine them, and then invest hard for the 2026 campaign, like they did for 2022. But maybe they might not be quite as hands-off as they were in 2021. I think the 2025 car will be at least not quite as bad as that one. But I feel like this time around, this year, I don't think that Kamatsu will be going for just a one-and-done upgrade path that Steiner championed for the longest time. We'll get more of a traditional upgrade development over the course of this year, as the team tries to figure out some of the quirks, then in turn fix their tyre issues, and then being able to sort out some more problems so they can do a big upgrade for 2025, and maybe have a car that's a little bit more predictable, and maybe a little bit quicker. Right now, if they can keep 6th place, which I do doubt because I think the other teams will develop, but if they can at least be in the hunt for the top end of the bottom half, then that might be really good in terms of development time. And of course, don't forget, they were 10th last year, they have the maximum ATR time, so they can then make the most of that. So you feel like with an engineer in charge, there is some sort of understanding in getting over the fundamental issues that the VF Haas cars have had. But then the next question is though, What's going to happen with their existing drivers? Who is going to be partnering the likes of Oliver Bearman? Because let's be real here, they would be absolute fools to not signing him up for next year, considering how well he did for Ferrari. And I'm pretty sure that Ferrari will be encouraging the likes of Kamatsu and Gene Haas to then bring him on, because as they did with Mick Schumacher, they helped subsidize his salary. So any money saved in terms of Haas, that is a good thing, because considering how much they like to save, that tiny little pit garage that they have, that saved them $250,000. That's how much they like to penny pinch. It's hard to say though, because both drivers they have right now are out of contract at the end of this year, with Hulkenberg looking more likely to be a draw for other teams in the latter half of the grid. Most people are pegging him to go and join Sauber, which will then become Audi, because they're then taking 100% control of the team, and they might want a German driver on their books. But if Nico doesn't go anywhere and he stays at Haas, then I feel like Kevin Magnussen will get the boot, because quite frankly, with Gunther Steiner no longer there, being one of the major champions for Magnussen, and one of the factors in getting him back to Formula 1 in the first place, I feel like Kevin may not have that champion and backer-upper for him to remain in Formula 1. And depending on how well they do this year, I don't know whether he might want to even be in Formula 1 anymore. He will have had a nice little resurgence. 2022 will have a special place in his heart because he got his pole position in Brazil, but he might want to go back to American racing because he was doing quite well in IMSA. I feel like Oliver will be in Kamatsu's plan for the future of Haas, because even though, again, he's not a very charismatic person in terms of sound bites, this boss is the kind of person Haas needs. Haas just needs to be quiet for a couple of years, away from the spotlight, away from Drive to Survive. Because Gunther, of course he's going to be in Drive to Survive. He'll be a pundit, and I bet you he'll be far more candid. So I think Netflix will be eating good still. But one thing is certain, Haas are looking far more stable than they have done in many years, and I feel like there is some plan going down. Not quite as assured as the Williams plan when James Vowles took over, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. But why am I so enamored with the Williams story, and why have they been quite secret with their brand new car? Why did they introduce it at the last minute? Well, to find out more about that, you can go and watch this video right next, coming up now. When you ever want to click on this thing, go and do it. I know what I'm talking about.